Nobody could explain what happened that evening outside Louisville, Kentucky. A man driving the back roads noticed a strange glow in a nearby field, blue and red light pulsing through thick smoke against the night sky. He pulled over and started recording. A metallic, dome-shaped craft, half buried in the earth, still smoldering. A deep trench carved into the ground behind it, as if it had skidded across the field before stopping. The footage is now called the clearest video of a crashed UFO ever recorded. But within hours, military convoys arrived. The site was sealed. The man was questioned. And by morning, everything was gone. Crashed UFO in Kentucky. The event happened just after 9:40 p.m. when radar systems detected a strange, unidentified object moving fast through restricted airspace. They were shocked, not because of the object, but because of how it moved. It was smooth, controlled, and unlike any known activity, completely defying normal explanations. Within minutes, military response units were mobilized. As jets scrambled, residents across multiple neighborhoods stepped outside, drawn by something unusual in the sky. A bright streak cut through the darkness, followed by an intense flash that lit up the horizon. Then came the sound. It was a deep, powerful boom that rattled windows and nerves alike. For many witnesses, this wasn't another passing phenomenon or UFO, but something shocking had happened that they didn't expect. There were many reports that the object had been brought down in a rural area, south of the city. Emergency responders and military personnel quickly sealed off the site. Access was restricted almost immediately, and officials said that this was an unidentified aerial craft, but they couldn't explain what it was or where it came from, and that made it even more unreal. At first, the UFO received surprisingly little media coverage, and it was almost like an invisible hand was covering it all up. It wasn't until a local resident uploaded images online that they couldn't hide it anymore. In the photos, you could see a large, dome-like object resting in the distance, surrounded by flashing emergency lights and smoke rising into the night sky. It felt almost cinematic, like it was something between a science fiction scene and a real-world emergency. As these images spread, so did the questions. Why wasn't this bigger news? What were the authorities saying? Many began to suspect that it was a cover-up. After all, the military had covered that area and restricted access, and the only thing we could see was the picture posted by the man. And then there were helicopter reports. Several residents said that before they even saw the images leaked online, they had sensed something unusual. Low-flying helicopters moved across the sky in coordinated patterns, with their engines echoing through the night for an extended period. This wasn't normal air traffic. Witnesses described multiple aircraft, flying lower than usual, sometimes lingering over certain areas. The timing aligned closely with the object's crash, leading many to think that the helicopters were part of a recovery operation. Still, the official statements remained minimal, and the only thing we have is statements from the people who saw this happen and the images taken by the witness in secret. So, what really happened that night in Kentucky? Was it experimental military technology, a misidentified object, or something far more extraordinary? Well, experts are looking into how this connects to the recent UFO sighting seen in Kentucky. Fast-moving lights in Kentucky. On the night of April 23rd, residents in Lexington, Kentucky, found themselves looking up at a sky that didn't behave the way it should. At about 9:49 p.m., a witness reported seeing what they described as a fast-moving, silent light streaking from east to west, so quick and precise that it seemed like a flash cutting across the darkness. This wasn't a blinking aircraft light or a slow-moving satellite. In fact, the object moved with unusual speed, covering a large stretch of sky in seconds, without any second trailing behind it. The silence was also strange. There was no engine noise or sonic boom. It was just clean and abrupt motion. According to eyewitness descriptions, the light didn't flicker or fade gradually. It appeared suddenly, moved decisively, and vanished just as quickly. For a moment, it seemed like something controlled rather than random, almost like someone somewhere was controlling this object and its movements. Reports like these aren't isolated in Kentucky. The state has seen a steady number of UFO sightings over time, and it seems like there's a trend of unexplained aerial phenomena being logged by civilians. What makes this even more shocking is the timing, clarity, and specific detail of this UFO. Still, some experts are saying we should be careful of calling this an extraterrestrial object. Similar fast-moving lights have often turned out to have far more grounded explanations. In previous Kentucky cases, unusual lights reported in the sky were later connected to objects like satellite formations, especially Starlink chains, which seem to be fast-moving, bright UFOs crossing the sky in sequence. But this April 23rd sighting doesn't perfectly fit those expectations, at least not yet. But a month before that happened, there was another UFO sighting, also in Lexington. Oval-shaped object moving in the sky. Just before midnight on March 28th, the sky over Lexington, Kentucky, became the focus of a quiet observation. According to a field sighting report, at about 11:58 p.m., at least 2 witnesses saw an oval-shaped object suspended in the night sky. It was darting across the horizon or blinking like a distant aircraft. It was bright, defined, and unmoving. The object was described as glowing white, with a smooth oval shape and a faint aura or haze surrounding it. Positioned at an estimated elevation of about 50 degrees in the sky, it seemed to be close, about a mile away. But what stood out wasn't just how it looked, but how it behaved. It didn't move. For nearly 10 minutes, the object remained fixed in place. There was no drifting, change in direction, or flickering lights that would suggest a conventional aircraft. And just like the situation in April, there was also no sound at all. It didn't look like a plane, drone, or even a satellite. It simply hovered, silently, as if it was anchored in the sky. Then, as quietly as it appeared, it was gone. There was no dramatic exit, acceleration, or visible descent. The object either disappeared from sight or faded into darkness, leaving behind only questions. One witness even managed to capture a photo, showing a distinct glowing shape. So, what was it? Historically, these sightings like this fall into a familiar pattern. Reports of hovering, silent objects, especially those with defined shapes like discs or ovals, have been documented for many years. In many cases, explanations point out to more ordinary sources, like high-altitude balloons, drones, or even bright celestial bodies misidentified. But what makes this Lexington sighting very weird is the lack of motion. Most aerial phenomena, whether it's natural or man-made, shows some form of movement. Even satellites drift steadily across the sky. A completely stationary object, especially one that seems to be structured and luminous, brings up more questions. Kentucky 2025 sightings. In 2025, Kentucky has quietly re-emerged as one of the more active places in the United States for reported UFO sightings, with cities like Lexington and Louisville ranking among the highest in the state for UFO reports. The pattern this year isn't defined by a single UFO, but a series of brief, sharp sightings that share one thing in common: They happen fast, leave little evidence, and raise more questions than answers. There's the March 28, 2025 sighting, which happened just before midnight, when witnesses in Lexington saw an oval-shaped object hovering silently in the sky. Less than a month later, in April, another sighting was reported in the same city, but the behavior was completely different. It was two sightings in the same city and completely different behavior. The contrast is exactly what is attracting the attention of many ufologists and experts. One object remained stationary and silent, the other moved rapidly and vanished. Both lacked identifiable features. Both occurred at night, and in both cases, there has been no confirmed explanation from authorities. Across the U.S., 2025 has already been described as a year of increased UFO attention, with more civilian reports and renewed discussions around unidentified aerial phenomena. Kentucky's UFO sightings right now are attracting a lot of attention, and this is causing experts to investigate some of their previous UFO cases that would blow your mind. It was just as shocking as the Clearest video that the man in Kentucky filmed, except in the past, there was no evidence. Bloomfield sighting. In 1978, the small town of Bloomfield, Kentucky, a quiet, rural, and home to barely 1,000 residents, became the center of one of the state's most persistent UFO waves. What started as a few unusual sightings quickly turned into something far harder to dismiss. Night after night, people started looking up. The reports were consistent. Many people saw strange lights, sometimes described as glowing orbs, appearing above the tree lines just outside town. One witness remembered seeing multiple balls of light, as many as 6 at a time, bright enough to illuminate the sky like daylight. These weren't faint stars or distant aircraft. They were intense, visible, and close enough to draw attention from anyone nearby. By mid-1978, the sightings were no longer isolated. Between 25 and 50 residents reported seeing the same phenomenon. In a small town, it's clear that there's something strange. Another strange aspect was the consistent timing. Most sightings happened between 10 p.m. and midnight, often in the same area outside Bloomfield. The weather didn't matter either. Whether it was clear skies or cloudy nights, it made no difference. The lights appeared anyway, hovering, shifting, and lingering for people to observe them. It was almost like people in the skies were monitoring the small town for months or years at a time. Local news at the time took notice. A 1978 report confirmed that these weren't one-off claims or second-hand stories. People were seeing something repeatedly, and they were certain it wasn't conventional aircraft. So, what exactly were they seeing? There were different descriptions, but the core details remained the same. There were glowing spheres, unusual brightness, and movement that didn't match planes or helicopters. There were also no reports of engine noise or blinking navigation lights. It was just silent illumination hanging in the sky, sometimes moving slowly, and other times holding position. For residents, the experience became strangely routine, and that became the unsettling part. It happened too regularly and became something else entirely. But some suspected that it could be man-made. They thought it was experimental military aircraft since it was close to military bases, and others suspected other explanations like atmospheric phenomena, electrical effects, or misidentified celestial objects. And of course, there were those who believed the lights were something beyond human origin. Today, the Bloomfield sightings of 1978 remain one of Kentucky's most talked-about UFO cases. But, a few years later, police officers in Kentucky found themselves actually facing an alien attack, although many people don't believe this. Thomas Mantell Incident. On the afternoon of January 7, 1948, the skies over Kentucky turned into the stage for one of the most dramatic and tragic UFO encounters in American history. It started around 1:15 p.m. when multiple calls flooded into authorities from across the state. Residents in towns like Maysville and Owensboro saw something unusual overhead. It was a light, bright object hanging in the sky. Witnesses described it as circular, metallic, and enormous, moving slowly or even appearing stationary. The reports quickly reached Godman Army Airfield at Fort Knox, where trained personnel confirmed they could also see the object. It wasn't behaving like a normal aircraft, and it didn't match any weather balloons. That's when the order was given. At about 2:45 p.m., 4 F-51 Mustang fighter planes were redirected to investigate. Leading the formation was Captain Thomas Mantell, a 25-year-old World War II veteran with over 2,000 hours of flight experience. But as the planes climbed, the object was climbing too. Mantell radioed back to the tower with words that would later become historic. The object was metallic and tremendous in size, sitting above him and moving steadily ahead. The higher they went, the more dangerous the pursuit became. One by one, the other pilots broke off because they were low on fuel, lacking oxygen equipment. But Mantell refused to do so. Ignoring instructions to level off, he continued climbing past 20,000 feet, into an altitude where oxygen is critical. His final transmissions suggested he was still trying to close in, still tracking the object, still pushing higher. Then there was silence. At around 3:15 p.m., contact was lost. Hours later, wreckage of his aircraft was found scattered across a farm near Franklin, Kentucky. Mantell had crashed at high speed. His watch had stopped at approximately 3:18 p.m., marking the moment everything ended. The official explanation came later. Mantell likely lost consciousness due to lack of oxygen, sending his plane into a fatal dive. As for the object he was chasing, investigations eventually suggested it may have been a top-secret skyhook balloon, unknown to pilots at the time. But the explanation wasn't enough. Too many people had seen the object. They described it as something structured, metallic, and massive. And Mantell himself clearly believed that he was pursuing something real and extraordinary. This became the first widely publicized death linked to a UFO encounter, and it changed how the public and the military viewed these sightings. Kentucky Hopkinsville Encounter.
It didn't hurt them. It just kind of rolled up in a little ball and kind of rolled back down the hill over there where the ship was.
My name is O.P. Baker, and I was in the house that night, and I saw them creatures. Back then, I wasn't going to no church, and I started church, and I've been going to church ever since. I remember we all were sitting there, about, I'd say around 8 o'clock. We heard a noise on top of the roof.
As far as the guns being shot, I don't know whether it was on the far side of the house or this side. I do know that they said they come over.
He said they would come up to the windows and they just kind of stick to the side of a house like a spider could. And he said they just kind of peek around the windowsill with their heads and some old big beady eyes, and they just look in the window and just stare.
Perhaps the strangest UFO sighting in Kentucky happened on the night of August 21st, 1955, in the rural outskirts near Kelly and Hopkinsville, Kentucky. This quiet farmhouse became the center of one of the most intense and widely reported UFO encounters in U.S. history. It started like any ordinary evening. Around 7 p.m., a visiting family member stepped outside and noticed a bright light streak across the sky, disappearing beyond the trees. At first, it seemed like a meteor, but then the night changed. Within hours, strange figures began to appear. According to the reports, small humanoid creatures, described as about 2 to 4 feet tall, with large, glowing eyes and thin limbs, approached the farmhouse. They didn't move like people. Witnesses said they floated, glided, or popped up suddenly at windows and doorways, peering inside. Inside the house were 11 people, 5 adults and 6 children, and panic spread quickly. The response was immediate. Armed with rifles and shotguns, the adults began firing at the figures. But something didn't add up. According to their accounts, the bullets didn't seem to have any effect. The creatures would fall back or disappear into the darkness, only to return moments later, circling the house again. Even stranger, this wasn't a quick sighting, but it lasted for hours. By late evening, the witnesses fled the farmhouse and drove straight into Hopkinsville, arriving at the police station visibly shaken. They reported that they had been under siege for nearly 4 hours, holding off unknown beings that they believed came from a landed craft nearby. The police took it seriously. Within minutes, a convoy formed. City police, state troopers, deputy sheriffs, and even military police from nearby Fort Campbell. When they reached the farmhouse, they expected chaos. Instead, they found something unsettlingly ordinary. Bullet holes in windows and walls. But no creatures, no craft, no physical evidence. And yet, the story didn't end there. According to witnesses, after officers left, the creatures reportedly returned again in the early hours of the morning. By the next day, the families had packed up and abandoned the house entirely. What exactly surrounded that Kentucky farmhouse on August 21st, 1955? We don't know yet, but it's impossible to ignore this shocking sighting. Kentucky is at the center of many UFO sightings today, and experts can't help but remember some of the past sightings that attracted widespread attention. Which of these surprised you the most? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. So, thanks for watching this video, and we will see you in the next one.